In this video, I'm going to introduce to you a color coding method for engaging synoptic passages. So you're going to want to have your Burton Throckmorton Gospel Parallels book handy. And over the course of the next 2 weeks, I encourage you to put much color into this book, and to do so moving forward. This is a text that I would encourage you to hold on to, that I think will be very important and valuable to you as you engage the gospel text, particularly the synoptic gospel text, for ministry, for preaching and teaching in the future. I think doing this in preparation for teaching on any passage from the synoptic gospels is a very valuable thing to do. Is that when you come to a text from the synoptic gospels that you might preach on, one of the first places I would go is here and do this kind of thing so you can see what the different synoptic authors do with a particular passage. And this really helps sort of highlight how a passage might be functioning in a respective synoptic text. It really brings out some of the things that are going on in Mark, Matthew, or Luke's version of a text respectively. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you this method. I'm going to show you what it sort of looked like, some results of it. And then at the end, we're going to walk through one together. So again, having Throckmorton handy. And as I said in the introduction video for this week, if you have some colored pencils, get those handy as well. Using colored pencils in the Gospel Parallels book is, in my opinion, the best way to go about this. Of course, other colored pens or crayons work as well, but just not quite as well as colored pencils do. So, what we're doing when we're engaging this color coding method, we're primarily comparing and contrasting the synoptic gospels. And by doing so, we're participating in what is called redaction criticism. Redaction is a word for emendation or changing or editing. And so redaction criticism is the practice of studying a text, and particularly for us, the synoptic gospels, with an eye to how an author or an editor has changed their source text and why those changes might matter. So those changes might matter in different kinds of ways. One way that they matter for our purposes for this week is they indicate something about the relationship between the synoptic gospels, but they also indicate something about what is important to each synoptic author. So we're identifying those similarities, and the differences. So when you find something that's unique in one of the synoptic gospels, it's oftentimes because that aspect is unique or important to that author. Sometimes it might just be a stylistic something that that author likes stylistically, but a lot of times it's sort of a thematic or a theological theme. And so what we're going to see is that oftentimes when you mark these passages and note that there are things that are distinctive of Matthew, or distinctive of Mark, and distinctive of Luke, respectively, a lot of times these really line up well with larger themes that are reflected in each gospel. So it's important to sort of know some things about Matthew on its own, Mark on its own, Luke on its own. And then when we come to doing this act of comparing the synoptic gospels, we can see how those larger thematic issues in each respective gospel come out in the way that each gospel author redacts, changes, and writes their own gospel texts. And so we're dealing not only then with the themes of each respective synoptic gospel, but how these changes relate to the synoptic problem and the different synoptic solutions. So when we're sort of able to visualize these differences in a color-coded mode, it sort of brings to the fore, or literally puts into color, the data that we're dealing with for assessing how these differences might be explained by the different synoptic solutions. And we'll see that in action in just a second here. But so the color coding method that I'm going to present to you involves the color wheel, the primary color wheel here. We have the three primary colors, red, blue, and yellow, and each one of them in combination with a different one or with all three together is going to make a different color. So the combination of red and blue is going to make purple. Red and yellow is going to make orange, blue and yellow is going to make green, and the combination of all three is going to make brown. And so what we do is we associate one color with each of the Gospels. And the way that I do this is I color Mark as red, I color Matthew as blue, and I color Luke as yellow. And the way this works is then when we go to our Throckmorton book, we can underline passages that are unique to Mark in the triple tradition, or parts of a passage that are unique to Mark in the triple tradition. We can underline those in red. We can underline anything that is shared between all three Gospels in brown, anything that is shared just between Mark and Matthew here in purple, anything shared just between Mark and Luke is going to be orange, and anything shared just between Matthew and Luke is going to be green. So in triple tradition passages, what we're going to see in triple tradition again is where Mark is the baseline and there's a passage in Matthew and Luke. We're going to see a whole lot of brown, and then we'll see a smattering of the other colors on the outside. In double tradition passages, those things shared between Matthew and Luke, we're going to see a whole lot of green, and then Matthew's unique aspects in blue, Luke's unique aspects in yellow. So I'm not going to sort of walk through this entire passage, but I want to show you what this looks like when we come to a triple tradition passage. So this is one of the first acts of Jesus's ministry, namely John proclaiming that Jesus is the one coming. And so when I mark this, what it ends up looking like is this. So you notice here I give us our different combinations up here. So Mark, Matthew, and Luke are going to be brown. Mark and Matthew together are purple. Mark and Luke together are orange. Matthew and Luke together are green. So you'll notice here that I have quite a bit of brown. This is the words that are shared between all three synoptic gospels. We've got a little bit of yellow at the beginning, and a lot of times what you'll see is yellow and green at the beginning because Matthew and Luke in the triple tradition will often change the beginning of Mark to something else. And then again at the end we have some yellow down here. And then we have this bit shared between Matthew and Luke that is in green here. So I want to be clear that this green, when you see green in a triple tradition passage, that is a passage in which Mark is present, this is not normally explained by Q. So this is a Matthew-Luke overlap in the triple tradition, and the double tradition, what would be explained by Q under the two-document hypothesis, is going to be green, but it's not going to be green in the triple tradition. So in the triple tradition, there is Q is not contained in the triple tradition. Q only in the double tradition only contains those things where Mark is not present at all. If this were to be sort of X'd out and we were to have no middle term. So when you see green in a triple tradition, this is not referring to Q. This would be referring to Matthew and Luke's own unique changes to Mark, or your own unique additions to Mark that happen to coincide with one another in the two-document hypothesis, whereas in the FAR hypothesis, this green would be explained by Luke looking at Matthew. And so then when you come to a true double tradition passage, this is what a true double tradition passage is going to look like, with nothing in Mark here. So that all of the green in a double tradition is explained either by Q or by Luke looking at Matthew and copying over Matthew's material. And when you mark a double tradition passage where there is no mark, what you're going to see is a whole lot of green and a smattering of yellow and blue. So in this case, Matthew has the Pharisees and the Sadducees coming out to John's baptism, and John calling the Pharisees and the Sadducees a brood of vipers. And this is sort of characteristic of Matthew's hostility towards these Jewish leadership groups. Whereas in Luke, it's not Pharisees and Sadducees who are coming out to John to witness John's baptism or be baptized by John, but it's simply the crowds. And John calls the crowds a brood of vipers. So this unique aspect of Luke, depending on what theory of or what synoptic solution one holds to would be different depending on that theory. So either Luke has changed Pharisees and Sadducees to the crowds from Matthew, if one holds to the Farrer theory that Luke saw this Pharisees and Sadducees and said, no, I want this to be the crowds. Or it could be that Matthew and Luke are looking at something independently of each other, Q, which would stand up here, and Matthew has decided to make this Q material about the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and Luke has decided to make this Q material about the crowd. So you see the sort of independence of one another there. And so what I want to do here is take up this passage that we looked at in the first video for this week. Remember, in our first lecture pause, I asked you to note the similarities and the differences between these passages. And now what we're going to do is mark this passage and sort of do a compare and contrast with what you came up with your similarities and differences not using this method, and then comparing those similarities and differences to what you see when you go about this method. So what we're going to do here is mark each of our colors, and we'll just take it turn by turn. So I'll ask you to go ahead and pause and do a certain color, and then I'll show you what I've come up with, and you can compare it to my results, and then we'll move on to the next color. So the first one I want you to do is the overlap between all three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and this is going to be in brown. For me, it's going to be in black because of the limitations of what colors I have here, but in brown, underline anything that is shared between all three Gospels here. So this is what my results look like here, and there's some sort of flexibility about how you do this. So if yours doesn't exactly line up with mine, you can be more or less exacting in the words that you underline here. But so what I've done is I've noticed that his mother and his brothers are shared in all three texts, but then they don't do the same thing when they come to, and this one should be underlined as well, him. When they come to him, there's different actions that are here. So we'll get to those in just a minute here. And then when it's reported to him that his mother and his brothers are there, we have your mother and your brothers repeated here, your mother and your brothers, your mother and your brothers. And they each want something to do with you, namely Jesus. But the action there, again, is going to be different. And so now what I want us to do is turn from the overlap between all three here. And what we're going to turn to is the Mark-Matthew overlaps. And these are going to be in purple, because remember, Mark is going to be red, Matthew is going to be blue, so our combination here is going to be purple. So go ahead and pause the lecture and underline everything in purple that's shared between Mark and Matthew alone that doesn't occur in Luke. So this is what it looks like for me. It's actually somewhat minimal. The purple, there's not a whole lot of purple in this passage, but we have a similarity between Mark and Matthew is that they are standing outside. So his mother and his brothers are standing outside. In Luke, we don't get that. We just get that they came to him. And then the other thing here is we get someone told him and someone said to him. So the words for said and told are different, but the object of speaking is him, namely Jesus, is the same between the two. So now what we're going to do is the same thing for the overlap between Mark and Luke. What is shared between Mark and Luke, but is not present in Matthew. So if Mark is red and Luke is yellow, our combination is then going to be orange. Yes. So I don't have an orange here. I'm going to use yellow and red combined, like this, a sort of double underline to indicate my orange. So go ahead and pause the lecture and underline the Mark-Luke overlaps in orange here. So just like our Mark-Matthew overlap, our Mark-Luke overlap is somewhat minimal here. So we have then, we start with the same, this would be an adverb in Greek, the same adverb. So Luke appears to be following the adverb used in Mark. And the verb came is shared between Mark and Luke here and not present in Matthew over here. And then the crowd is here in the same location. Matthew has a crowd as well. And so we might we could potentially also color this crowd brown, but Matthew's crowd is a little bit earlier in the passage. So in this case, I opted to call this a Mark-Luke overlap rather than a triple tradition overlap. So now the next one that we're going to do is the overlap between Luke and Matthew. Any place where Luke and Matthew agree together against Mark. So this is going to be a combination of blue and yellow, which is going to make for green in our color wheel. And so any overlap between Luke and Matthew is going to be in green. And so remember, this green material is not Q material in the triple tradition. So two document hypothesis or two document theorists would not call the green in the triple tradition from Q. They would say that this is Matthew and Luke changing Mark in the same way, coincidentally, without looking at one another. Whereas FAR theorists would say, no, this is Luke looking at and agreeing with Matthew. So let's see what we find for the green overlap between Matthew and Luke here. Go ahead and pause and underline. So our green is going to look something like this. Three unique verbs that are shared between Luke and Matthew here. So they told Jesus, so using a different word or a different verb from Mark. Mark says said, whereas Matthew and Luke have told. And then the mother and brother of Jesus are standing outside, whereas in Mark they are just outside. And then they want to do something to Jesus. In the case of Matthew, they want to speak to Jesus. And in the case of Luke, they want to see Jesus. But again, a shared verb between wanting. So three words, single words in both English and in Greek that may or may not be significant. So these are small enough occasions, and they're not strings of words. They're single words where it is quite plausible that uniquely Luke and Matthew have decided to change Mark in the same or similar ways to one another. But it also seems equally as plausible that these are carried over in Luke. These are carried over from Matthew under the FAR theory. So in my estimation, these greens aren't necessarily telling one way or another in this passage. In other passages, I think there is more to say either for the FAR theory or the two document hypothesis on the basis of the green, but I don't think this is one of those passages. So, last thing we're going to do here is mark what is unique to Matthew, to Mark, and to Luke. So in Matthew, this is going to be blue. In Mark, this is going to be red. And in Luke, this is going to be yellow. So what is contained only in each one of the synoptics, respectively. So go ahead and mark blue, red, yellow, and let's compare after you unpause. All right, and here's what I have come up with in the case of Luke and of Mark. It's going to be maybe a little bit harder to see because of my limited palette with the technology I'm using here. But it's very clear with Matthew what we have unique. We have, while he was still speaking to the crowds, we have someone telling him, which is only in Matthew. This word look is a very common one in Matthew that is less common in Mark and Luke. So you'll often have people being addressed with this word look. What they want to do is speak with Jesus, and then Matthew continues on in the passage after Mark and Luke have ended. When it comes to Mark, we have this unique verb sent. We have called as a unique aspect of Mark. We have the crowd, what they're doing, sitting around him. They're only sitting around Jesus in Mark, and they only say or said to Jesus in Mark. And then Mark also has the sisters included with the brothers. This is a unique addition to Mark. So this is actually a case where Matthew and Luke agree with each other by omitting something from Mark. So they've taken out the sisters that are in Mark. And what they are doing, the brothers and sisters and mother, they're asking for Jesus. Whereas in Luke, they are wanting to see him. No, they're wanting to see him. Here's the verb. And then we have this movement of the crowd into the sort of middle of the passage from it's here in Matthew, and then it's reflected. The crowd is in the middle of the passage in Mark and Luke introduces it with this unique phrase, but they could not reach him because of the crowd. So our only unique Lucain aspects are this part right here and this part right down here. And so this is the method that I'm going to ask you to use for the next couple synoptic activities that we're doing here. You're going to do this on your own for part of your work for this week, and then also for the sort of more major assignment for the week. So we're going to get a little bit of practice doing this some more, and I hope that you find it to be revealing in different ways in different passages. So sort of every passage you mark, you're going to find the results to be a little bit different than what you find here. And you may often find that you sort of, if you're anything like me, you waver back and forth. Sometimes you'll mark a passage and think, oh, this makes a lot of sense under the two document hypothesis, and Q can really explain this. And other times you'll mark a passage and think these similarities between Matthew and Luke that aren't shared in Mark are so so interesting and unique, so as that they could not be coincidental. And you might be thinking, well, maybe I'm leaning towards the FAR theory at this point. So that's one way in which this marking is going to hopefully inform your thinking. The other way is that it's going to highlight themes of each individual gospel, whether those be theological themes, sociological themes, or other such themes.